I grew up in a place so small that most maps didn't bother naming it. A cluster of streets, a single blinking stoplight, and enough gossip to fuel the diner's coffee talk for decades. Outsiders passing through might have called it quiet. Locals knew better. Quiet didn't mean peaceful. It meant the silence that comes before a storm. Our little town was surrounded by farmland, and the biggest stretch belonged to the Miller family. Miller's field went on for miles, flat and unbroken except for a thin strip of dead trees marking its far edge. Farmers said the land was good, but no one liked being out there after dark. Too open, they claimed. Nowhere to hide if something came for you. When I was 16, something happened there that no one really talks about anymore. Not because they forgot, but because they don't want to remember. It began on a late July night, the air thick with the kind of heat that clings to your skin long after the sun goes down. I was driving home from my friend Kyle's place in the next town over. The road that cut past Miller's field was empty, just a thin ribbon of cracked asphalt slicing through an ocean of tall corn. That's what I saw them. 3 pale blue orbs hung above the crops. At first, I thought they were aircraft lights, maybe a crop duster, even though it was way too late for one. But they weren't blinking, they weren't moving in any way I had ever seen before. They just hovered. I slowed down until my tires crunched over the gravel shoulder. The car's headlights washed over the first few rows of corn, their tassels swaying in a breeze I couldn't feel. I turned off the engine. The night was wrong. No crickets, no cicadas, not even the whisper of wind. It was the kind of silence to make your heartbeat sound deafening in your ears. The lights began to shift. Not toward me, but around each other, weaving slow circles like they were tied together by invisible string. Their glow wasn't steady. It pulsed faintly, like breathing. I leaned out the window. The air had a strange tang, metallic, like the smell you get when you press a coin to your tongue. My skin prickled as if the atmosphere itself had grown heavier. The 3 lights drew closer to each other, merging until they formed one perfect sphere of pale blue radiance. I couldn't tell if it was the size of a beach ball or a car. Distance felt wrong, hard to measure. It hovered for maybe 10 seconds. Then, without warning, it collapsed in on itself into a single pinpoint of blinding light and shot straight upward into the black sky. Gone. I sat frozen, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My mind scrambled for explanations. Drones, fireworks, some experimental aircraft. But I knew deep down it wasn't any of those. When I finally made it home, I didn't tell anyone. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. The next morning, the news broke. Tom Grady, a farmer whose land bordered Miller's field, had gone out early to check his irrigation lines and found something strange. A perfect circle burned into the earth. 30 feet across, the soil blackened as if it had been torched, but there were no signs of fire outside the ring. Tom swore the ground was still warm after sunrise. The police dismissed it as pranksters. Maybe some kids had made a crop circle. But none of us had ever seen kids with the kind of equipment needed to scorch the earth like that. That night, I told Kyle what I'd seen. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I think I've seen them too," he said. I felt a chill run down my spine. "When?" He hesitated. "Last week, but they weren't in the sky." I stared at him. "Then where?" He swallowed hard. "In my room."
I didn't sleep the night Kyle told me that. The image of pale blue orbs floating inside his bedroom wouldn't leave my mind. I kept picturing them hovering over his bed, their glow washing over his face while he lay frozen. I wanted to believe he was messing with me, but Kyle wasn't the type to joke about this kind of thing. He'd been pale, shaky. He kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected something to be there. The following evening, I drove over to his place. He lived on the edge of town, the kind of old farmhouse where the wood floors groaned under every step. His parents were out of town, which I thought was a good excuse to crash there, not because I was worried about him, but because I didn't want to be alone. We stayed up late in his living room, the TV muted, a single lamp casting a soft yellow glow. I kept asking him for more details, but he avoided my eyes. "They didn't move like you'd think," he finally said. "They just sort of appeared, and I couldn't move or call out, like my body didn't belong to me." "Sleep paralysis?" I offered, though I didn't believe it. He shook his head slowly. "No. I was awake. I know I was awake. I remember every sound, every shadow in the room, but there was this humming, low, like a refrigerator but deeper. It was in my bones. And then..." He stopped. "And then what?" He rubbed his face. "Then they went into me." I laughed nervously, but he didn't join me. His hands were trembling. "You mean like..." "He means they disappeared. The light touched my chest and it was inside me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, and then it was morning." We both sat in silence. I could hear the faint ticking on the wall. Around midnight, the lights in the house flickered, just for a second, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. "Probably the storm coming in," Kyle muttered, though the sky outside was clear. The flicker happened again. This time the lamp dimmed, then flared brighter before settling. That's when I heard it. The low hum Kyle had described. It was faint, but it seemed to come from everywhere at once. We exchanged a glance. He stood up, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't!" The hum grew louder, the sound thick in my ears. My teeth ached from the vibration. Then the air in the room began to shift, not moving like a breeze, but warping, bending. And there they were. 3 pale blue orbs floating, not in the window, not above us, but inside the living room. They pulsed softly, each rhythm sending another wave of vibration through the floorboards. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. One of them drifted toward me, slow but deliberate. It stopped inches from my face. The light was blinding up close, but not in a normal way. It didn't feel like it was hitting my eyes. It felt like it was inside them. My vision swam, not from brightness, but from something probing, searching. The hum deepened. My thoughts became foggy, as if each one was being stolen before I could finish it. And then, black. I woke on the couch. The lamp was still on. Kyle. Kyle was gone. I called out for him. No answer. I searched the house, kitchen, hallway, upstairs bedrooms. Nothing. His car was still in the driveway. When I stepped outside, I saw it. In the middle of the miller's cornfield across the road, another perfect blackened circle. And standing at its center, facing away from me, was Kyle. "Kyle!" My voice cracked as it left my throat. He didn't move, not even a twitch. The wind rustled through the corn, but he stood there perfectly still, his head tilted slightly upward, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I crossed the road, my heart thudding in my chest. Every step into that field felt wrong, like the air itself resisted me. The closer I got, the colder it became, though the August night had been warm just minutes before. "Kyle, we need to go," I said, my voice shaking. I reached out to grab his shoulder. The moment my fingers touched him, a static shock surged through my arm, so strong it made me yelp and stumble back. The hairs on my arms stood up. That's when I noticed the hum again, low and resonant, coming from beneath the ground. "Kyle, please!" He turned slowly. His eyes glowed faintly blue, reflecting no emotion, no recognition. His lips moved, but the sound that came out wasn't his voice. It was a deep, layered tone, like a chorus of whispers speaking in unison. "They are here." Before I could respond, the corn around us began to sway violently, as though a storm was tearing through, but the air was still. The stalks bent and snapped, forming a widening circle around us. And then the lights descended. They weren't small orbs this time. They were massive, silent shapes hovering over the field, their surfaces shimmering like liquid metal. No engines, no rotor blades, just an impossible stillness that pressed down on me like invisible hands. One of the ships, if you could call it that, emitted a beam of pale blue light. It wasn't a normal beam. It seemed solid, almost alive, writhing and pulsing as it touched the ground. Kyle stepped into it without hesitation. "Kyle, no!" I lunged forward, but the instant my foot crossed into the light, I felt weightless. My vision exploded into a blinding haze, my body frozen mid-motion. Shapes swirled in the brightness, silhouettes long and thin, with too many joints, heads bending in unnatural ways. The hum was deafening now, not just in my ears but in my bones, in my blood. It was like every part of me was being pulled apart and examined piece by piece. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. My mind filled with images, flashes of cold, endless corridors made of black stone, a sky with 3 moons, oceans of liquid light. Things that couldn't be real, things that shouldn't exist. And then I felt it. Something moving inside my head. Not physically, but deeper, where thoughts form before you even realize you're thinking them. It wasn't speaking to me in words, but I understood it. A message, not from one voice, but from thousands, overlapping into a single undeniable truth. You are seen. I don't know how long I was suspended in that beam. Seconds, hours. When the light vanished, I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. My vision cleared just in time to see the ships rising silently into the sky. They didn't fly away. They vanished, folding into the darkness like they'd never been there at all. The circle in the corn was still smoldering. Kyle was gone. I stayed there on my knees for what felt like forever, staring at the scorched earth where Kyle had been. My ears still rang with the hum, even though the ships were gone. Every hair on my body stood on end, as if the air around me still carried their static charge. Finally, I forced myself to stand. My legs were unsteady, trembling so hard that each step through the corn was a struggle. The night was deathly quiet. No wind, no insects, not even the distant barking of dogs. It was the kind of silence that felt wrong, like the world itself was holding its breath. When I stumbled back onto the road, I looked toward the diner. It was dark. No neon sign, no parking lot lights, as if the building had been abandoned for years. My car sat in the same place I left it, but the hood was covered in a thin layer of ash, like soot from a far-off fire. I tried calling Kyle's phone. The line connected, but instead of a ring, I heard that same low hum, faint but unmistakable. I hung up immediately. By the time I made it home, the eastern sky was just beginning to pale. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those corridors again, those impossible landscapes, those inhuman shapes bending closer and closer. The police came later that morning. I told them what happened, or at least a version of it. I said Kyle wandered into the field, that there was some kind of strange light, and then he was gone. They asked if I'd been drinking. I told them no. They took notes, nodded politely, and left with the kind of expression people wear when they've already decided you're crazy. For the next week, I avoided the field, but I couldn't avoid the feeling that I wasn't alone. At night, I'd hear faint tapping on my windows. Sometimes I'd wake up to find the back door unlocked, though I swore I'd bolted it before bed. On the 7th night after Kyle disappeared, I woke at 3:12 a.m. to find my bedroom bathed in that same pale blue glow. My heart slammed in my chest. I didn't have to look outside to know what I'd see, but I did. They weren't in the field this time. They were hovering directly over my house, 3 of them, silent and immense, blotting out the stars. The light wasn't searching the ground, it was aimed straight at my window. I backed away, but the light followed me, bending unnaturally to keep me in its center. The hum started again, low at first, then growing until it rattled my teeth. My phone rang. The screen lit up with one word, Kyle. Against every instinct screaming in my head, I answered. There was no greeting, no breathing, just his voice, or what used to be his voice. It was slower, hollow, each word carefully spaced apart, as though the mouth speaking them wasn't used to forming human sounds. They know where you are. The call ended. The light flared so brightly it burned through my eyelids when I squeezed them shut. And then, just like before, everything went silent. I opened my eyes. The ships were gone. But on my desk, where there had been nothing before, lay a single black feather. It pulsed faintly with blue light. It started with the sound. Every night for the past week, just after 2 in the morning, a deep mechanical hum would roll through the hills surrounding my cabin. At first I thought it was some distant truck or industrial machine, but the more I listened, the more I realized it had no source, no direction. It was everywhere at once, vibrating through the walls, through the bed frame, through my bones. The first time it happened, I walked out onto the porch, expecting to see the glow of headlights or maybe a farmer's tractor in the distance. Instead, the forest was drowned in darkness, the stars unnaturally sharp against a cloudless sky. The sound faded within minutes, leaving me shivering in the cold. By the 3rd night, I was staying up on purpose, coffee in hand, waiting for the hum. My curiosity had shifted into something closer to dread. Animals had begun acting strangely. The deer that usually came to graze near the tree line were gone. Owls that had always hooted deep in the night were silent. Even the raccoons that raided my garbage vanished. It wasn't just the silence, it was the stillness. The air no longer moved during those hours. The leaves didn't rustle, the grass didn't sway. It was as if the world itself had been put on pause. On the 6th night, I saw them. At exactly 2:16, the hum began, low and steady. I killed the lights in the cabin and stood by the window. Out over the eastern ridge, a pale red glow rose slowly above the treetops. It wasn't fire. It wasn't the moon. The light pulsed, almost breathing.
It hovered there for a while before beginning to drift toward my property. My pulse raced. The glow passed silently over the valley, and then I saw it more clearly. A massive disc, so dark it was only visible because of the faint red outline tracing its shape. It moved slower than any aircraft I'd ever seen, yet there was no wobble, no sound beyond the hum, no sign of propulsion. When it reached the forest near my cabin, the disc stopped. The hum deepened, vibrating the glass of the window. In the next instant, a thin beam of red light stabbed down from its center into the trees. The forest inside that circle shifted. The trunks of the pines bent slightly inward, the leaves seemed to flatten, and the shadows twisted into shapes that didn't belong to anything solid. My skin prickled and my teeth ached. Then the light blinked out, and so did the hum. The disc rose, gliding straight up into the sky until it was swallowed by the stars. I should have felt relief. Instead, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The trees where the beam had touched were moving. Not swaying in the wind, moving, as if something inside them was trying to get out. By morning, I almost convinced myself it had been a hallucination brought on by lack of sleep. But when I walked out toward the edge of the forest, the lie I was telling myself began to crumble. The patch where the red beam had landed looked wrong. The pine needles on the ground were blackened as though they had been burned, yet there was no smell of smoke. The trunks of the trees were faintly warped, their bark stretched taut like skin pulled over something swelling beneath. And then there were the holes, perfectly round, no wider than a coin, dotting the trees in erratic clusters. When I leaned closer to one, I swear I saw movement inside. Something pale, something wet. I stumbled back, heart pounding, scanning the forest for any sign that I was not alone. The silence was still there, not peaceful, but oppressive, as if the world itself had been put on pause. I decided I needed proof. If this was real, I wanted something to show, even if I never told a soul. I set up my old trail camera facing the beam site, strapped to a nearby oak. I checked the batteries twice, tested the sensor, and walked back to the cabin. That night, I sat in my chair, staring at the dark outline of the forest through the window. The hum began right on schedule. My skin crawled. The glow rose again from beyond the ridge, and soon the disc was there, hovering in the same place as before. The hum was stronger this time, pressing against my chest like invisible hands. The red beam shot down once more, but tonight it was wider, brighter. I could see the mist inside the circle swirl as though caught in an invisible vortex. And then I saw shapes inside the beam. They weren't trees. They weren't animals. They were tall, impossibly thin figures, their limbs bending in ways that made no sense. They didn't walk. They flowed, shifting forward as if gravity had no hold on them. One of them turned, and I froze. Even from this distance, I could tell it knew I was there. Its head was elongated, almost conical, and where a face should have been, there was only smooth, pale surface. No eyes, no mouth, yet I felt the weight of its attention like a physical grip. The beam blinked out, the hum stopped, and the disc drifted upward. I sat motionless for a long time before forcing myself to check the camera. When I reached the oak, my stomach dropped. The camera was gone. In its place, a single blackened feather lay on the ground. It was too large for any bird I knew, and when I picked it up, it felt warm, as though it had been lying in the sun. That was the moment I understood something important. They knew I had been watching.
I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the tall figure turning in the beam, its smooth head locking onto me across the dark. The warmth of the feather lingered in my palm long after I had thrown it into the fireplace. By morning, I decided to leave. The cabin had been my escape from the world, a place to breathe, but now it felt like a trap. I packed in a daze, my hands trembling as I shoved clothes into my duffel. I told myself I would drive into town, stay at the old roadside motel for a few days, maybe longer, just until whatever was happening passed. The problem was, it was already too late. As I loaded the last of my things into the truck, I noticed tracks in the dirt driveway. They weren't animal prints. They were long, narrow depressions, almost like the imprint of a deer hoof, except stretched, distorted. They went from the tree line straight toward my cabin and then stopped at the front steps. Inside, the air felt heavy, thick, and there was a faint smell of ozone like the moments before a lightning strike. My trail camera was sitting on the kitchen table. The batteries were missing. I stood frozen for what felt like hours. Finally, I grabbed the camera and stuffed it in my bag. I didn't want to know what was on it, not yet, I just wanted distance. I started the truck and pulled out onto the narrow dirt road. The forest pressed close on both sides, the branches arching overhead. Halfway to the main highway, the radio cut out, replaced by a low, warbling tone. It wasn't the hum I'd heard before. This was higher, sharper, like something drilling straight into my skull. My vision blurred. The truck began to slow even though my foot was on the gas. A bright white light exploded ahead of me, blinding. I slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop. The light hovered above the road, rippling faintly, as though the air itself was bending around it. Then it split into 3 smaller orbs that darted into the trees. The warbling tone faded. I sat gripping the wheel, my heart thundering in my chest until I could breathe again. I turned the key. Nothing. The truck was dead. I had no choice but to walk. The forest was wrong in daylight. The colors seemed muted, the greens too dark, the shadows too deep. I could feel the air shift as I moved, as if the forest itself was breathing in time with me. Somewhere ahead, I heard a faint rustle, followed by a long, drawn-out creak. I told myself it was just a branch, but then I saw it. Something tall and pale, standing between 2 trees. Its limbs were too long, its torso impossibly narrow, the skin stretched tight over a frame that didn't seem built for this world. It tilted its head, and the shadows behind it seemed to ripple outward. Another shape emerged, then another. They were all watching me. I stood frozen, my body refusing to obey the desperate urge to run. The forest was silent, except for the slow, rhythmic sound of my own breathing. The 3 figures didn't move, but their presence pressed against me like a weight. My mind screamed to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen them, but my eyes wouldn't let go. The tallest of them stepped forward. Its movements were fluid, almost graceful, but wrong in a way I couldn't name. The skin was not pure white, it was translucent, faintly glowing like thin ice lit from behind. Its hands were long, each finger tapering to a fine point, and they hovered inches from my chest without touching. The air around me vibrated, my teeth hurt, my vision swam, and for a moment I thought I could see shapes moving under their skin, flashes of light, twisting lines, patterns that shifted faster than I could comprehend. It was as if I were staring at something trying to disguise itself as flesh, but unable to keep the mask steady. The second figure raised its arm. Something small floated between its fingers, a sphere no bigger than a marble, pulsing with dim blue light. It drifted toward me, stopping just at the center of my forehead. There was no sound, no physical contact, but suddenly I was no longer in the forest. A sky without stars stretched above me.
Black clouds churned in slow spirals, and below, an endless plain of silver dust shimmered faintly under some unseen light. In the distance, structures rose, thin, jagged towers with no windows, their surfaces crawling with shadows that moved like living things. I couldn't tell if they were miles away or just beyond my reach. Something moved behind me. I turned, but there was nothing. And yet the feeling of being watched was absolute. A whisper slid into my mind, not words exactly, but intent. They had been here before. They were here now. They would be here long after. The vision collapsed in an instant. I was back in the forest, gasping for air. The figures were closer now, encircling me. I realized then that I hadn't heard a single bird or insect since stepping out of the truck. The world was holding its breath. The tallest one leaned down until its face was inches from mine. The skin shimmered again, and for the briefest second, I saw something beneath it. Not bone, not muscle, but something shifting and coiling, as if its true form was too vast to fit inside the shell it wore. Then the light came. It erupted from the ground, from the trees, from the air itself, blinding and total. I felt my body lift from the earth, my limbs heavy and useless. The forest fell away beneath me, shrinking into darkness. I wanted to scream, but there was no sound, no breath, nothing. When I woke, I was lying on the dirt road beside my dead truck. My duffel bag was gone, my watch was gone, my phone was gone. The sun was low, the day almost over, though I was sure only minutes had passed. I staggered home on autopilot, my mind numb. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. Something under my skin pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. And from far away, just at the edge of hearing, the warbling tone began again.